June 1945. The Nazis, once a formidable force seeking world domination, have been brought to their knees by the relentless advance of the Red Army. The Soviet forces, hailed as liberators, have stopped the darkness from spreading further. They captured Berlin, marking the decisive end of World War II in Europe. But as the dust of war settles and the world looks towards a hopeful future, a new shadow looms on the horizon. The countries that proudly proclaim themselves as bastions of democracy, promising freedom and justice, soon revealed a sinister truth. Hidden behind the facade of liberty, they are not as righteous as they seem. The end of the Soviet Union in 1991 was portrayed in the West as the inevitable triumph of capitalism over any form of social projects. The United States positioned itself as the vanguard of democracy, the leader of the world, with a divine duty to lead and rescue the world from tyranny. Communism was depicted as the enemy of mankind. Under the influence of the Cold War and waves of liberalization, the last president of the USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev, signed agreements with the republics of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine to recognize their independence. The Soviet Union was dissolved illegally and undemocratically, catching citizens by surprise, as a few months earlier, about 77% had voted in referendums to remain united. The decision was made by political elites rather than through direct participation of citizens. The Belavasia Accords were signed in December 1991 by the leaders of the three Slavic republics without seeking approval from the Soviet Parliament or the citizens of other Soviet republics. Newly elected President Boris Yeltsin of the Russian Republic pushed through various capitalist reforms. Russia became a member of the International Monetary Fund. Through the economic reforms supported by the IMF, neoliberal capitalism was introduced into the Federation. By January 1992, state controls over prices were removed. Ownership of state-owned enterprises was transferred to private hands. Government intervention in the economy was reduced, and policies to reduce budget deficits through cuts in public spending were implemented. Russia's economy was open to the United States and European countries. In the early 1990s, the poverty rate surged, with some estimates suggesting that over a third of the population lived below the poverty line. Inflation rates soared to unprecedented levels. Annual inflation rates reached triple digits, peaking at over 2,500% in 1992. Industrial production fell by 20%. By the mid-90s, unemployment rates in Russia reached double digits, with estimates ranging from 10% to 15%. Reports indicated widespread shortages of basic necessities such as food, medicine, and consumer goods. The powerful USSR is no more. With the end of the Cold War, the bipolar world order dominated by the US and the Soviets shifted, leading to a unipolar moment where the United States emerged as the sole superpower. What followed next was a harrowing and merciless campaign of occupation and bombing against countries deemed undemocratic. Coerced into submission and assimilated into the Western financial system for economic control. Given the historical context of Western imperialism and ongoing injustices, one might question why there's a concerted effort to portray China as imperial and in need of containment. Could it be a diversionary tactic, deflecting attention from Western powers' own imperial legacies and contemporary global hegemony? Or perhaps it serves geopolitical interests, framing China as a threat to justify military buildup and economic competition. Critically examining such narratives is essential to understanding the complexities of global power dynamics and challenging biased perceptions.
What we need to do is to recognise that China is the largest threat, both to the world and to the United Kingdom, for freedom and democracy.
And for me, that also shows that there is clearly a need for Europe to work on de-risking some important and sensitive parts of our relationship.
China is transforming and impacting the world in remarkable ways. What the country has achieved is truly phenomenal. Over the past 40 years, China has developed into its current state, lifting millions out of poverty and creating wealth for its people, all without resorting to invasion or colonial exploitation. This is a unique feat in history. The primary goal of most governments worldwide is economic growth to escape poverty and create a modern economy in terms of the production and distribution of goods and services. The People's Republic of China has achieved all of this, and no other country comes close. China outproduces the United States in many commodities and has achieved a level of technological sophistication the US is struggling to keep up with. What is clear now is that Western colonial powers cannot accept the fact that a country from the global south, identifying as socialist, has become a symbol of prosperity and wealth. Here's what you should understand about the West's aversion to socialism, communism. Laos is a poor, landlocked country with no significant natural resources and a population of only 6 million today, just 2 million in the 1960s. Despite posing no real threat to the United States, the White House and Pentagon during the 1960s imagined a dire, insidious threat from Laos. To address this perceived threat, a CIA-run ad hoc air force dropped more explosives on Laos than the official air force did on Germany during World War II. Laotians endured more bombs per capita than any other people in history. What the West wanted from China after the century of humiliation was the continued economic exploitation of the 1.3 billion people who could not only produce Western goods, but also consume them, which would enrich the Western capitalists. China was allowed in the UN, the IMF and other Western-controlled organizations because they wanted the CPC to play according to the Western International Rule-Based Order. The Asian giant is now the second most developed and powerful influence on the world economy, and before the end of the decade, according to experts, will be the #1 leader of world economic events. The Chinese government has achieved economic prosperity for its citizens. Wages skyrocketed almost 5 times in 40 years, quadrupling the real wages of the average Americans. This is a level of economic well-being achieved in record time, which has never been seen before in human history. China is the manufacturing center of the whole world. Essential goods that are needed for human survival and consumptions are manufactured in China at a lower price compared with Western luxury goods, which aren't necessary or prioritized in the global south. The Communist Party of China, CPC, has managed the development of a nation with a unique blend of private capitalist enterprises and state-owned enterprises. What the Chinese have achieved is proof of the efficacy of socialism. One distinguishing trait of the Chinese government is its capacity for forward planning and adaptability, enabling it to rectify errors and adjust economic strategies as needed.
China's latest crisis, the housing crisis, this is what it looks like. They have more than 7 million empty homes or more than 7 billion square feet of built-up space. These empty homes can accommodate 3 billion people, which is twice the population of India, nearly 10 times the population of America, 15 times the population of Western Europe, and 140 times the population of Beijing itself. That is how big China's problem is.
This is not because the government did not know what they are doing. The CPC has planned their economic growth. The housing was built before people needed them. It was done in relation to their society's growth. They have done it before when hundreds of millions of Chinese were moved from the rural areas to the modern industrial cities in less than 40 years. Due to the failure of communism and socialism in Eastern Europe, as well as the collapse of the Soviet Union, the West was convinced that the CPC would not survive if the Chinese people embraced Western ideologies. This is why China was accepted into Western institutions such as the IMF and World Bank. But what happened instead is that China became the biggest factory in the world with 35% of all production output, on which the West depends. The threat here is the realization that instead of the Chinese and the global South remaining subordinate to the West, the world is embracing a socialist model with Chinese characteristics. One of the arguments against China is that President Xi Jinping is a dictator. Therefore, China is seeking world domination. Western countries rely on subjugation and neo-colonial plunder to fuel their development. In contrast, what China has done over the past decades is to contribute to the alleviation of poverty worldwide. To achieve world domination, it is believed that a nation must annex countries, hold colonies, establish military bases, and enforce its culture and political ideology. There are no Chinese military bases in foreign countries. The country spent approximately 250 billion yearly on its military, which is less than the GDP percentage that most European countries spent on NATO. In 2015, when President Xi announced the Made in China 2025 plan, Chinese companies transitioned from prioritizing quantity to emphasizing quality, aiming to emerge as global leaders in innovation by 2030. The West, however, struggled to accept the idea of a non-white nation leading in science and technology. In response, the US initiated a trade war to restrict Chinese industries. Unfortunately for the US and the European allies, China is now leading in critical global technologies: 5G, AI, renewable energy, EVs, e-commerce, digital payments, genomics, high-speed rail, and biotech. It is truly remarkable how every month the country introduces new breakthrough innovations poised to change the world. The reason you don't hear about it often is because the Western-dominated media won't cover it. The truth is, not only is Asia now the center of innovation worldwide, but it is also the richest continent on the planet. Unlike the Europeans, who lag far behind in the race, the US, however, still leads in vaccines, medical countermeasures, and quantum computing. The West's fear of China is not its potential for seeking world domination. It is the fact that China is leading in global innovation without resorting to wars, plunder, or suppressing any country. Xi Jinping is not a dictator because he operates within the framework of the CCP, which has a collective leadership and decision-making process. While he holds significant power, it is checked by the party's structures and traditions. China is not a dictatorship, but a one-party socialist republic, where the CCP plays a central role in governance and policymaking. The US is also considered a two-party state, dominated by the Democratic and Republican parties. Other parties exist, but their influence on national decision-making is minimal due to structural and systemic barriers. Western liberal democracy is not the sole path to democracy. Various forms of governance, including China's model of a socialist republic, have provided stability, development, and a voice for the Chinese people. The issue is not democracy versus autocracy. It is the West versus the global South, which actually comprises the majority of the world. For centuries, the world has struggled to find a way out of Western imperialism and economic supremacy, but has failed to do so. China is the first country to succeed in this regard. The Belt and Road Initiative has garnered China more friends globally, resulting in increased votes and a stronger voice at the United Nations against powerful imperial countries. The move to corner China with various sanctions and trade restrictions pushed China to create overcapacity in mid-tech industries. As a result, everything in China is at an all-time low price, creating a race to the bottom. This is a race that the West can never win, because the West cannot afford such low profit margins compared to a country like China. The West only races to the top. The implication for Africa and the rest of the world is profound. Jobs can be generated by purchasing Chinese goods. Recognizing this, many Africans are actively ordering agricultural machines, generators, water pumps, and solar panels to launch their very own businesses. There is no need for Africans to risk their lives in the Mediterranean Sea chasing a European dream. Chinese essential goods offer top quality at exceptionally low prices. a new world is emerging, and the only conceivable obstacle to its progression would be the initiation of World War III by the West.
强壮的青年